The coffin was already closed. Her photograph was on the stand. Her name was on the program. Everybody in that room believed my granddaughter was dead. And then at 11 o'clock at night, in a dark and empty funeral home, someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around, and there she was. She grabbed my hands, and I felt her warmth, her pulse, the very real weight of her fingers, and she looked me in the eyes, and she said, "Grandpa, I'm not dead, but if we don't move right now, I will be. My name is Harold Whitmore. I am 71 years old, and I live alone in a small apartment in Portland, Oregon, or at least I lived alone until the day my granddaughter Melissa came back to me. That is the story I want to tell you today. A story I have never spoken aloud to anyone because I was afraid. No one would believe me. But it happened. Every single word of it happened. Let me start at the beginning. Not the very beginning, I'll get to that part soon enough, but the morning of May 18th, 2024. The morning of Melissa's wedding day. I was standing outside the entrance to the Grand Willow Wedding Hall in downtown Portland, turning a small orange prescription bottle over and over in my fingers. Heart medication. My cardiologist had been after me. To slow down, to stop stressing myself, to take things easy. That morning, I swallowed the pill. Dry no water and barely tasted the bitterness going down, because the bitterness inside my chest was already worse than any medicine. "Grandpa Harold, you all right?" The voice came from beside me. It was Ryan Calloway, the groom. 32 years old, broad-shouldered, the kind of handsome that comes with a good haircut and expensive shoes. He worked in finance, he'd told me. Good family, Melissa said. Everything on paper was perfect. And yet every time I looked into that young man's eyes, I felt something I could not name. Like staring at a window with the curtains drawn just a little too tightly. Like shaking a hand that was slightly too cold. Just a little nervous, I told him and managed to smile. I wasn't nervous. I was terrified. Melissa was 8 months pregnant. She had insisted on the wedding anyway, had pushed for it, actually, as if some invisible clock were ticking down inside her. I had tried to talk her out of it, or at least into waiting. "After the baby comes," I had said. "Let's do this properly, sweetheart." But Melissa had shaken her head with that gentle, stubborn patience she'd always had, even as a little girl. She was 26 years old. She had grown up in my house since she was 10. After her parents, my son. David and his wife Karen were killed in a car accident on a rain-slicked highway outside of Eugene. That night, I had held a sobbing child in my arms in a hospital hallway and made a silent promise to David's memory: I will take care of her. I will keep her safe. Standing outside that wedding hall 16 years later, I wasn't sure I had kept that promise. I walked Melissa down the aisle myself. She wore a white dress that had been altered twice to accommodate her growing belly, and when she took my arm, I could feel the trembling in her fingers. Her skin was pale, not bridal pale, but the pale of someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. The circles under her eyes were deep. She had been a nurse at St. Catherine's Regional Medical Center for 3 years, working long shifts, always giving more than she had. "I can still stop this," I whispered as we reached the aisle. "Right now. Say the word." She gave me a watery smile. "I can't, Grandpa." "I have to." Those 3 words, "I have to," haunted me for a long time afterward. The ceremony proceeded. I took my seat in the front row. Ryan stood at the altar, straight-backed and confident, watching Melissa approach. I watched him watching her, and at one moment, just one, I saw him glance at his watch. A quick, subtle look. The kind of glance you give when you're checking on a schedule. Not on his bride. On a schedule. The minister began. Vows were exchanged. When it came time for Melissa to speak, her voice faltered. She pressed one hand to her abdomen. I leaned forward in my seat. Then she made a sound, not quite a scream, more like a gasped cry of pain, and a red stain spread across the white fabric of her dress. Fast, terrifyingly fast. Melissa! I was on my feet and running before I had even decided to move. She was already collapsing. Ryan lunged forward to catch her, his face a mask of shock and horror, but I was watching his eyes, and his eyes were not shocked. They were calculating, already calculating. Someone called 911. The ambulance came. I held Melissa's hand the entire time, in the aisle, in the ambulance, in the corridor outside the operating room. Her fingers were ice cold. 5 hours later, a surgeon came out of the OR and looked at me, with the expression that no one ever wants to see on a doctor's face. "I'm so sorry," he said. "We did everything we could. She experienced severe hemorrhaging. She didn't make it." I sat down on the floor of that hospital hallway. I didn't choose to. My legs simply stopped working. Behind me, Ryan Calloway was already on his phone. I heard him clearly through the roaring in my ears. "Yes, she passed. I need to start the claims process. How quickly can the paperwork be filed?" His wife had been dead for less than 10 minutes. He was calling the insurance company. I pressed my face into my hands and made myself remember the promise I had made to my son 16 years ago. I will keep her safe. I had failed. But something deep in my gut, something old and stubborn that refused to go quiet, told me that this was not over, that there was something terribly wrong with what had happened in that operating room, that Ryan Calloway was not a grieving husband, that he was something far worse. If you're finding the story compelling, please hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Your support helps us share more important stories like this one. Now let's continue with what happened next. Before I tell you what happened at the funeral home 3 days later, I need to take you back, 8 months back, to the autumn that changed everything. It was September 15th, 2023, the 15th anniversary of my son David's death. Every year, Melissa and I would observe that day together quietly, just the two of us, setting out a small memorial with photographs and lighting a candle. It wasn't morbid. It was love. It was our way of keeping David and Karen close. But that particular September, I was flat on my back in a hospital bed at St. Catherine's. My heart arrhythmia had flared up badly the week before, and my cardiologist had admitted me for observation and medication adjustment. I called Melissa to apologize, knowing she would have to mark the anniversary alone. "Don't worry about it, Grandpa," she told me, and her voice was brisk and cheerful in that way. She had the way that usually meant she was working hard not to sound sad. "I'll handle everything. You just get better." What I didn't know was that Melissa came home that evening to an empty apartment, put out the photographs, lit the candle, and then sat on the kitchen floor and drank 3 glasses of wine that turned into something closer to a bottle. 15 years of grief, compounded by exhaustion and loneliness, had finally found their way out. At 11 o'clock that night, her doorbell rang. Standing outside was a man she recognized from work. Ryan Calloway. His mother had been a patient on Melissa's ward a few months earlier, and he had come by the nurse's station a couple of times to thank the staff. He was charming, Melissa had mentioned once in passing, but she had kept her professional distance. That night he was holding a brown paper bag, soup from the diner down the block, sparkling water, a small bouquet of flowers from the all-night grocery. "I heard about your grandfather being in the hospital," he said, "and I remembered that today was, I just wanted to make sure you weren't alone." Melissa should not have opened the door. On any other night, she wouldn't have. She was a sensible young woman with good instincts. But she was also exhausted and heartbroken, and for the first time in years, utterly without the one person who had always anchored her. She opened the door. I found all of this out later, pieced it together from Melissa's journal, from her own account, and from a few painful conversations. What happened that night she told me with great difficulty and great shame, though she had no reason to feel ashamed. She had been targeted. She had been maneuvered into a vulnerable position by someone who had studied her carefully and waited patiently for exactly the right moment. A month later, she came to my hospital room to tell me she was pregnant. "He says he wants to marry me," she told me. "He says he'll take responsibility. Take responsibility. Not I love her. Not I want to build a life with her. Responsibility." I should have said no right then. I should have dug my heels in and refused to let this happen. But Melissa was pregnant, and she was frightened, and Ryan Calloway was there. With his warm smile and his steady income and his careful words, and I was an old man with a bad heart who was already in a hospital bed. So I said nothing. And 6 months later, I was standing outside a wedding hall watching my granddaughter walk toward a man I had never fully trusted. After Melissa's death, or what I believed to be her death, I went back to the apartment we had shared. I told myself I was there to collect some of her clothes for the burial. But really, I think I needed to be near her things, to sit in the room where she had grown up, and breathe the air that still smelled faintly of her shampoo. I found her journal in the bottom drawer of her nightstand, under a worn stuffed rabbit I had sewn for her when she was 7 years old. She had kept it all those years. 20 years of wear had faded the fabric and left one ear slightly torn, but there it was. "Grandpa made Hoppy for me," she used to say as a little girl. "Hoppy is my best friend." I sat on the edge of her bed and held that rabbit and cried for a long time. Then I opened the journal. The entry from May 15th, 3 days before the wedding, stopped me cold. "Ryan gave me more of those vitamins today, the big white ones. They make me dizzy every time I take them, and they taste wrong, bitter in a way that vitamins shouldn't be. I keep thinking I should ask someone at work, but I don't want Ryan to think I'm suspicious of him." Am I suspicious of him? I turned back a few pages. May 10th. I was using Ryan's laptop to print something, and his browser was open to a folder of insurance documents. My name on 4 different policies. 4. He's never mentioned any of them to me. Why wouldn't he mention them? I sat in my granddaughter's room for a long time after reading those words. The orange light of late afternoon came through the curtains, and the apartment was very quiet. 4 insurance policies, in her name, that he had never told her about. I put the journal in my coat pocket and went back to the funeral home to sit with my granddaughter's body. Except as I would learn before the night was over, the coffin did not contain my granddaughter at all. The 3rd night of the visitation, the night before the funeral, I was alone in the viewing room at Riverside Memorial. It was past 11 o'clock. The other mourners had gone home. Ryan had stepped outside to take a phone call, which had become something of a pattern over the 3 days. I noticed he always went outside, always kept his voice low, and he was always gone for exactly as long as he needed to be before walking back in with a bereaved expression carefully arranged on his face. I had overheard enough of one of those calls, through a cracked window, to know what they were about. "It's been processed," he had said, in a voice I'd never heard him use before, flat, businesslike, utterly stripped of emotion. "All 4 policies. Yeah, should clear in a week. 20 million total. Wait, let me check. Yeah, 20 million. 4 policies at 5 million each." A pause. The old man? He doesn't know anything. He's just grieving. $20 million. I had gripped the windowsill and pressed my back against the wall of the funeral. Home hallway, and breathed very carefully through my nose until the worst of the dizziness passed. $20 million. My granddaughter's life priced and collected. Now I sat alone in the viewing room, looking at the photograph of Melissa on the memorial stand, a picture taken the day she received her nursing license. Her hair pulled back, her smile wide and genuine, and I talked to her the way I had always talked to her when I didn't know what else to do. "I don't know how to fix this," I said quietly, "but I'm going to find a way. I promise you that." Then someone touched my shoulder. I spun around so fast I nearly fell. Standing behind me was a figure in a dark hoodie, face hidden in shadow, small enough to be a young woman. She was shaking. She was glancing toward the door as if she expected someone to come through it at any moment. "Who are you?" I managed. She reached up with both hands and pulled back the hood. I grabbed the back of the nearest chair. It was Melissa. My Melissa, standing in the viewing room of her own funeral, alive, her face white as chalk, her eyes wide and frightened, and underneath the fear blazing with something fierce. "Grandpa," she whispered, "it's me. I'm alive. But we have to go right now. Ryan's going to be back any minute." I could not speak. I could not move. I simply stared at her, and she stared back at me. And then she crossed the space between us and took both of my hands in hers. And her hands were warm, flesh and blood warm, not cold, not hollow, not the hands of a ghost. "I'm not dead," she said again, more firmly this time, as if she needed me to believe it before anything else could happen. I faked it. I had help. "I'll explain everything, I promise. But we need to get out of here before he comes back." I followed her. What else was I going to do? We went out through a side door and into the parking lot, and Melissa kept checking over her shoulder until we were 2 blocks away from the funeral home, standing under the yellow light of a street lamp. Then she turned to face me and began to talk. The story she told me in the next 30 minutes was one I have spent months trying to fully comprehend, even though I lived through most of it beside her. 3 months before the wedding, before any of this, Melissa had borrowed Ryan's laptop to print a recipe. His browser was open, and she had inadvertently seen a folder on his desktop labeled simply Policies. Curiosity, she said, made her click on it. Inside were 4 insurance documents, all in her name. The beneficiary on each was Ryan Calloway. She recognized the company names. She recognized her own signature on 2 of them signatures she had given. She realized with growing horror on what Ryan had told her were routine financial paperwork forms she needed to sign as a married couple. She had not been signing what she thought she was signing. But there was more. Underneath the insurance folder were 4 other folders, each labeled with a woman's name: Sarah Mitchell, Jennifer Flores, Donna Hartley, Caitlin Brady. "I opened them," Melissa told me, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't stop myself. Each one had a photo, a summary: age, job, background, vulnerable circumstances, and then a timeline. When he met them, when they married, when they died, and the insurance payout after each death. 4 women, 4 deaths, 4 insurance payouts, each one between $5 and $7 million. "They all died the same way," Melissa said. "Complications in childbirth, hemorrhage, medical emergency, ruled accidental in every case." She had stared at that screen for a long time. Then she had quietly closed the browser, put the laptop back exactly where she had found it, gone to the bathroom. and sat on the floor in the dark for 2 hours. I thought about going to the police, she told me. But he'd already gotten away with it 4 times. 4 times. The evidence was circumstantial. And I was pregnant and legally married to him, which meant he could claim I was unstable, hysterical, making things up. I needed something concrete. So she had gone to someone she trusted absolutely, Dr. Margaret Sullivan, the chief of obstetrics at St. Catherine's. The woman who had delivered Melissa's own nursing orientation lectures years ago, who had become something of a mentor and surrogate mother to her, who Melissa knew in the absolute bedrock way you know certain things about certain people would believe her. Dr. Sullivan had believed her. And Dr. Sullivan, it turned out, had a great deal of experience and a great deal of courage. Together they had built a plan. The baby, a girl, had arrived 6 weeks early, delivered safely at St. Catherine's in a procedure attended only by the small circle of nurses Melissa trusted with her life. The infant was immediately placed in a private neonatal unit under a false name, attended by staff who had been briefed in absolute secrecy. At the wedding, what appeared to be Melissa collapsing and hemorrhaging was a carefully staged medical event. A special mixture of harmless dye and saline had been prepared in advance. A drug to temporarily slow her heart rate and create the appearance of acute distress was administered at a precise moment. The padded belly Melissa had worn for the last 2 months of her apparent pregnancy concealed the reality she had already given birth weeks earlier. At the hospital, she had been rushed into an OR staffed entirely by trusted colleagues. For 5 hours, a controlled fiction was maintained. When Dr. Sullivan emerged and told me that my granddaughter was dead, she was lying to protect her. And the coffin in the viewing room, I will admit that this one took me a moment to process, contained a medical training mannequin from the hospital's simulation lab, ballasted with sand to approximate human weight. "I am so sorry I couldn't warn you," Melissa said, and her voice broke on the last word. "I wanted to. I almost did, a dozen times. But Ryan is smart, Grandpa. He watches everything. If he suspected for even 1 second that you knew, he would have disappeared. Changed his name again and gone somewhere else and found someone else." "Again," I said. She nodded. "His real name isn't Ryan Calloway. That's what I need to tell you next. The man I had known as Ryan Calloway was born Daniel Sherwood. That was the name he had been given at birth, in a small town in rural Virginia. And it was the name attached to the earliest record of what he truly was. I found this out the morning after Melissa appeared to me at the funeral home, when I went to the county records office and began pulling threads. I told the clerk I was a bereaved family member trying to confirm some details for estate purposes. She was kind and thorough, and what she found gave me a chill that hasn't entirely gone away. "He's moved 5 times in 6 years, she said, scrolling through her screen with a slight frown. "And there's a name change on record. Legal petition granted in 2018. He was Daniel Sherwood changed to Ryan Calloway. When I got home, I searched the internet for Daniel Sherwood. It took me less than 10 minutes to find a news article from 2016 in a small Virginia paper. Sherwood cleared in girlfriend's drowning death. Authorities say evidence insufficient for charges. A 20-year-old college student named Ashley Park had drowned during a weekend trip to the Outer Banks. Her boyfriend Daniel Sherwood, then 24, had collected on a life insurance policy 3 weeks later. Friends of Ashley's had told police she was terrified of open water and would never have gone swimming voluntarily. The investigation went nowhere. 5 women before Melissa: Sarah Mitchell, Jennifer Flores, Donna Hartley, Caitlin Brady, and Ashley Park, the one who started it all. That evening, I drove to meet Melissa at the place she had been hiding since the funeral. A small rented room above a bookshop on the east side of the city arranged by Dr. Sullivan. Melissa was there with a woman I did not yet know. A woman about 30 years old, thin and pale, with tired eyes that had seen too much. "Grandpa," Melissa said, "this is Grace Ellison. She's the only other person who survived him." Grace had been Daniel Sherwood's first wife. Or rather, she had been the woman he had married after Ashley Park, before he changed his name and moved north and became Ryan Calloway. She had been 22 when they met, recently orphaned, lonely, working double shifts at a diner to make ends meet. "He was so kind," she said, staring at the table between us. I keep thinking about that. How kind he seemed. How he always knew exactly what to say when I was sad. Like he had a key to every locked door in me. She in Sherwood, she still called him that, she said, because she needed a name that separated him from the decent people she had met since had married quickly. She had become pregnant. He had taken out 4 insurance policies in her name without telling her. Then he had taken her on a weekend trip to the beach. "He pushed me off a jetty," Grace said. It was the most matter-of-fact sentence I had ever heard a person speak about their own attempted murder. Just like that. 1 second we were standing there watching the waves. Then I was in the water. She had survived because an outgoing tide had shoved her against a rock shelf, and because a fishing boat was close enough that the captain saw her go in. She had been in the hospital for 3 days. When she came out, Sherwood was gone. He had already reported her as missing, presumed drowned, and collected the first of what would have been 4 insurance payouts. Before the fraud was discovered, he had disappeared, changed his name, moved to Portland, become Ryan Calloway, and started again. Grace had spent 7 years trying to find him. She had gone to the police repeatedly. She had been believed by some and dismissed by others. She had no documentation, no physical evidence, only her word against a ghost who had shed his name like a snake sheds its skin. Then, 8 months ago, a retired investigator named Frank Olson had found her. Frank Olson was 70 years old, silver-haired, with a quiet manner, and sharp eyes that had lost none of their precision in the years since he had left the Portland Police Bureau. He had spent his entire career in homicide. He had been working Ryan Calloway's case, Daniel Sherwood's case on his own time, and his own dime for 5 years. His granddaughter's name had been Emma Olson. She had been 23 when she met Daniel Sherwood at a gym, recently divorced, working as a paralegal. She had married him 6 months later. She had died in an apparent obstetric complication 11 months after that, and Sherwood had collected on her 3 insurance policies and moved on before anyone had thought to ask the right questions. Emma had been Frank Olson's only grandchild. When Dr. Sullivan reached out through a mutual contact to tell Frank that a new survivor had emerged, he drove to Portland the same day. I met him the morning after meeting Grace at a quiet coffee shop on the east side. The 4 of us crowded into a corner booth, speaking in low voices like conspirators, which I suppose is exactly what we were. What I have between my personal investigation and the files Melissa copied from his laptop is enough to put him away for the rest of his life, Frank said. He had a yellow legal pad covered in neat, small writing. What I don't have, what every prosecutor in 3 states has told me we need, is a direct statement, an admission. Something we can play for a jury that they cannot explain away. He looked at Melissa. "If you're willing," he said, "I think I know how to get it." Melissa nodded before he had even finished the sentence. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. She was not shaking. She had not been shaking since the night she appeared to me in that funeral home. Whatever fear she'd carried through the months of deception and waiting had burned itself down into something harder and quieter and more permanent. She was not afraid of Ryan Calloway anymore. She was going to end him. The plan was simple, the way the best plans always are. Simple enough to execute precisely, but with enough variables built in that if something went wrong, there were fallbacks. On the morning of May 25th, 1 week after the wedding, 1 week after Ryan Calloway had stood at my granddaughter's coffin and cried, his rehearsed tears Melissa called his cell phone. I sat beside her when she did it. She put the phone on speaker and held it on the table between us, and her voice, when he picked up, was absolutely steady. "Ryan, it's Melissa. Don't hang up." There was a long silence. "Then this isn't funny. Who is this?" "It's me."
"I'm alive."
"The doctors made a mistake. They thought I was gone, but I stabilized. I've been recovering in a private care facility." A pause she had rehearsed. "I know you've been trying to collect the insurance. I saw the paperwork." Another silence. Longer this time. I watched Melissa's face. She did not look away from the phone. "Where are you?" he said finally. "Waterfront Park. The bench by the old clock tower, the one where we had our first date. Come at 3 o'clock. Come alone. If I see anyone with you, I'm going straight to the police." She ended the call and set the phone down carefully on the table, and then let out a breath so long and controlled that it sounded almost meditative. "He'll come," Frank said from across the table. "He has to," Melissa said. "Either I'm a loose end he needs to tie up, or he thinks he can talk his way out of this. Either way, he has to come." At 2:45, I was on a park bench near the fountain, reading a newspaper I was not reading. Frank was jogging along the riverfront path in a gray tracksuit. Grace was seated at a table outside a nearby cafe, nursing a coffee she had ordered an hour ago. Two of Frank's former colleagues from the police bureau, both of them retired, both of whom he had briefed and who had agreed to be present as private citizens ready to make a citizen's arrest if necessary, were positioned further along the path. And somewhere on Melissa's chest, under her light summer jacket, was a small audio recorder that Dr. Sullivan had sourced from a security supply company. State-of-the-art. Would pick up a whispered conversation at 10 feet. At 3 o'clock exactly, Ryan Calloway walked into the park. I had seen him in his dark suit at the funeral, performing grief with professional polish. I had seen him in his wedding clothes, handsome and controlled. Now he wore dark jeans and a gray jacket, and his face was the palest I had ever seen it. He moved quickly, eyes scanning, one hand in his pocket. He saw Melissa on the bench and stopped walking. From my position 30 yards away, I watched it happen as if in slow motion. I watched the shock move through him, a visible thing, almost physical, like a man catching a fist in the stomach. He actually took a step backward. Then he stood very still for a moment, and I could see him doing what he always did, calculating. He walked toward her. I could not hear the conversation from where I sat. I would hear it later, in its entirety, on Frank's recording device and on the one Melissa wore. Here is what was said, as best as I can render it. Ryan sat beside her on the bench. He said her name once quietly, testing it. She looked back at him without expression and told him she wanted to know the truth. He asked what truth. She named the women Sarah Mitchell, Jennifer Flores, Donna Hartley, Caitlin Brady. She watched his face change. She named Grace Ellison. He stood up. She named Ashley Park. "How do you know that name?" he said. His voice had dropped to something very low and very dangerous. Because you keep files, she said. You've always kept files. That's your problem, Ryan. Or should I say Daniel? The sound he made when she said his real name was something between a laugh and a threat. He looked around the park. He looked at me on my bench. He didn't recognize me, or if he did, he dismissed me as irrelevant, an old man reading his newspaper. You're going to walk away from this, he said. You're legally dead. No one will believe a dead woman. I know what you put in my vitamins, Melissa said. It wasn't true, she was guessing, using what was in her journal as leverage. But she said it with absolute certainty. It's still in my blood work. I had it tested last week. You want to talk about what that's going to look like when it goes to a toxicologist? He stared at her for a very long moment. And then slowly something in him seemed to deflate. The calculation stopped. The mask came down. What do you want? He said. I want you to say it, Melissa said. All of it. Say what you did to those women. Say what you did to me. Say it, and I'll consider whether I go to the police today or give you a head start. He believed her. God help him. He believed her, because he had spent his whole life calculating the angles. And he had looked at Melissa and decided she was the kind of person who would make that kind of deal. He had never understood her at all. He talked for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Frank timed it on his watch. He admitted to Sarah, to Jennifer, to Donna, to Caitlin, to Ashley. He admitted to what he had put in Melissa's vitamins, a blood-thinning compound, untraceable in standard obstetric panels, designed to cause hemorrhage at a moment of physical stress. He admitted to the insurance policies. He admitted to Grace. That's enough, Frank said, stepping out from the running path. Ryan spun around. He saw Frank. He saw the 2 former officers closing in from the left. He turned back to Melissa, and his face, for just a moment, was something I am glad I did not have to see up close. And then he saw Grace. She had walked from the cafe and was standing 10 feet away from him, her arms at her sides. She looked at him the way people look at something they have been afraid of for a very long time and have finally stopped being afraid of. Hello, Daniel, she said. He didn't speak. His legs buckled. One of Frank's colleagues had to take his arm to keep him upright while the handcuffs went on. I walked across the park to where Melissa was standing. She was watching the officers lead Ryan Calloway, Daniel Sherwood toward the parking lot, where 2 Portland Police Bureau detectives, who Frank had briefed that morning, were waiting. Grandpa, she said when she saw me coming. I put my arms around her. She put her head on my shoulder the way she had when she was 10 years old, and I had held her in that hospital hallway and made a promise. I kept my promise, I said into her hair. I told you I'd keep you safe. She laughed. It was a wet, broken sort of laugh, the kind that lives right next to crying. You helped. I did most of the heavy lifting. You did all of it, I said. I just held the flashlight. Epilogue. What came after? Daniel Sherwood, the man I had known as Ryan Calloway, entered a guilty plea 6 weeks after his arrest. Advised by his public defender that the recording alone, combined with Melissa and Grace's testimony and Frank's 5 years of investigative documentation, made any trial a formality with a foreseeable outcome. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in her remarks, called his crimes a calculated and systematic destruction of human life for financial gain, demonstrating a complete absence of the capacity for remorse that is the bare minimum prerequisite for return to society. The families of Sarah Mitchell, Jennifer Flores, Donna Hartley, Caitlin Brady, and Ashley Park were notified. Some of them came to Portland. I sat with them in a conference room at the district attorney's office and listened to them cry and talk about their daughters, their sisters, their friends. There is nothing adequate you can say to people in that kind of pain. I held Sarah's mother's hand for a long time, and we did not say much of anything. Melissa was formally declared alive again on a Thursday morning at the county clerk's office. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head, looked at the paperwork and then looked at Melissa and then looked at the paperwork again. "I've processed a lot of unusual documents in this office," she said slowly. "But this is a first." Melissa smiled. "It's a first for me, too. My great-granddaughter Melissa named her Stella, which she said meant star, and which seemed right to me, was 6 weeks old on the day her mother became legally alive again. I held her in the parking lot outside the clerk's office, standing in the June sunshine, while Melissa filled out the last of the forms. Stella grabbed my finger and held on with the fierce, unreasonable grip of someone who has only recently learned that the world exists and intends to make the most of it. I did not cry. I had cried enough. I just stood there in the sun and held this small, serious person and thought about all the things I wanted to tell her someday, about her mother, about the kind of courage it takes to stay very still and wait when every instinct is screaming at you to run. Grace Ellison lives 3 blocks from us now. She has a job at a bookshop, the same one whose back room she had hidden in during the weeks after the funeral, and she comes to dinner every Sunday. She has started sleeping through the night again, she told Melissa recently. First time in 7 years. Frank Olson comes by sometimes, too. He is quieter than he used to be, Melissa tells me, though I did not know him before. He keeps a photograph of his granddaughter Emma on his keychain. He does not talk about her much, but when Stella grabs his finger the way she grabs mine, I have seen something move across his face that I do not have a precise word for. Relief, maybe, or something even older than relief. As for me, I am still 71 years old, and my heart still misbehaves occasionally, and my cardiologist still tells me to slow down. I do not entirely listen to him. I am up at 6 every morning to take Stella to the park while Melissa sleeps in after a night shift. I push the stroller along the river path where, 8 months ago, Frank jogged in a gray tracksuit while my granddaughter sat on a bench and waited for the devil. The river looks different in the early morning, quieter, more honest somehow than it does when the city is awake. Stella likes the ducks. She makes a sound, not quite a word yet, and points, and I stop the stroller and we watch the ducks together for as long as she wants. I think about David and Karen sometimes, standing there. My son and his wife, taken from us too soon, leaving behind a child I was not sure I was equipped to raise. I was not a perfect grandfather. I was away when I should have been there. I missed the thing that was right in front of me for months. But I was there in the end. When it counted most, I was there. Take care of her, I say sometimes when no one is listening, to whoever might be listening. We're doing our best down here. The ducks swim. Stella points. The river moves. We are still here.